When I was your age, a movie ticket cost 50 cents, your grandmother tells you. You laugh, thinking she must be joking, but she's right. That same ticket costs $15 today. The movie hasn't changed, the money has. Your salary just increased by 5%, but groceries are up 8%, rent is up 10%, and somehow you're falling behind. Your savings account pays 1% interest while prices rise 7% per year. Simple math tells you you're getting poorer while doing everything right. This isn't an accident. This isn't a mystery. This is inflation, a silent force that transforms your money into monopoly paper, bit by bit, day by day. And once you understand how it works, you'll never see money the same way again. Before we can understand inflation, we need to understand money itself. For most of human history, money was tied to something real: gold, silver, or other precious metals. These metals were scarce, difficult to produce, and couldn't be created out of thin air. This natural limitation meant that prices remained relatively stable over long periods. When paper money was introduced, it was initially just a claim ticket for real gold or silver stored in a vault. You could take your paper dollars to a bank and exchange them for actual precious metals. This system, known as the gold standard, provided a natural check on money creation. You couldn't print more paper money than you had gold to back it. Everything changed in 1971. President Nixon announced that dollars could no longer be exchanged for gold. This transformed our money into what economists call fiat currency. Money that has value simply because the government says it does. This shift gave central banks the power to create new money at will without the constraints of gold backing. Every dollar in your pocket, every number in your bank account has a story. That story begins at the Federal Reserve, where the tools of modern money creation shape the financial destiny of millions. The process is both simpler and more complex than most people imagine. The Federal Reserve creates money through several channels, each flowing into the economy in different ways. When the Fed buys government bonds, it does so with money created out of thin air, instantly adding to the money supply. This isn't physical cash being printed, it's digital money appearing in bank accounts with a few keystrokes. The same happens when the Fed lends to commercial banks or buys financial assets through quantitative easing. But the Fed's most powerful tool is one you experience every day: interest rates. Through the federal funds rate, the Fed conducts a grand orchestra of money creation and destruction. When the Fed lowers this rate, it sets off a chain reaction throughout the economy. Banks can borrow more cheaply from each other, leading them to offer lower rates to businesses and consumers. A business owner who wouldn't borrow at 7% might jump at the chance when rates hit 3%. A family that couldn't afford a mortgage at 6% suddenly qualifies at 4%. This interest rate mechanism transforms the economy like water flowing downhill. Lower rates mean more borrowing, and in our banking system, more borrowing means more money creation. Every time a bank issues a loan, it creates new money. The borrower gets money to spend, but the original deposit remains in the system. Money multiplies through this process, expanding the supply far beyond what the Fed creates directly. But this system has a dark side. Like a drug, the economy becomes addicted to easy money. Businesses structure themselves around cheap credit. Asset prices depend on low rates. Politicians celebrate the short-term benefits while ignoring the long-term costs. Raising rates becomes increasingly painful, trapping the Fed in a cycle of booms and busts. Inflation occurs when the money supply grows faster than the production of goods and services. Think of it like this: if we double the amount of money in circulation, but don't produce any more goods or services, prices will eventually double. Each dollar becomes worth less because there are simply more dollars chasing the same amount of stuff. This process often starts slowly and then accelerates. Stage 1. Asset inflation. New money flows into stocks, real estate, and financial assets. Stage 2. Consumer price inflation. Prices of everyday goods and services rise. Stage 3. Wage inflation. Workers demand higher wages to keep up with prices. Inflation creates a complex dance between producers and consumers. Let's follow a simple product, a loaf of bread, through the inflation cycle. Our local baker faces rising costs everywhere. Wheat costs more because farmers pay more for fuel and fertilizer. Electricity for the ovens costs more. Workers demand higher wages to afford the rising cost of living. The baker must decide: absorb these costs and reduce profits, or raise bread prices and risk losing customers. Meanwhile, consumers face a brutal choice. The bread that cost $2 last year now costs $3. Their wages haven't increased at the same rate. They might switch to cheaper bread, buy less, or cut spending elsewhere. Some will go into debt to maintain their standard of living. As consumers cut spending, businesses see lower sales. They might lay off workers or raise prices further to maintain profits. Those laid-off workers then have less to spend, further reducing demand. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, is the official measure of inflation, but it has serious flaws that can mask the true rate of inflation. CPI measures a basket of consumer goods and services, but this basket changes over time. When steak becomes too expensive, the basket might substitute with cheaper chicken. This substitution makes inflation appear lower, even though people are being forced to lower their standard of living. The CPI uses quality adjustments that can be misleading. If a TV costs twice as much but has better features, the CPI might not count this as inflation, but consumers still have to pay the higher price, regardless of the improved quality. Many companies engage in shrinkflation, reducing product sizes while keeping prices the same. Your favorite chocolate bar might shrink from 100 grams to 90 grams, a hidden 11% price increase that might not be fully captured in CPI. A more honest way to understand inflation is to look at the money supply itself. Think of it like this. If you're filling a pool with water, measuring the water you're adding, the money supply, gives you a better picture than occasionally measuring the water level, CPI. Here's how the money supply is measured. You have M1, physical cash and easily accessible money, M2, M1 plus savings accounts and money market funds, M3, M2 plus larger time deposits and institutional funds. Let's look at 2020 to 2021. While CPI showed modest inflation, the M2 money supply increased by over 26% in just 1 year, the largest increase since the Federal Reserve's founding. This massive expansion of the money supply preceded the high inflation we saw in subsequent years. Inflation's damage goes far beyond just higher prices. It fundamentally changes human behavior and society. $1 saved today might be worth 90 cents next year, 80 cents the year after. This punishes savers and encourages immediate consumption or speculation. To combat inflation, people are forced to seek higher returns through increasingly risky investments. Conservative savers become reluctant speculators just to preserve their wealth. Those closest to the money creation benefit first, while those furthest away see prices rise before their incomes can adjust. This creates a Cantillon effect, redistributing wealth from the poor to the rich. As savings become worthless, long-term planning becomes difficult. This affects everything from retirement planning to business investment. Society becomes more present-oriented and less future-focused. Let's look at some dramatic examples. In Weimar, Germany in 1923, a loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January cost 200 billion marks by November. People rushed to spend their paychecks immediately, knowing the money would be worth less tomorrow. Once the richest country in South America, Venezuela saw its currency become virtually worthless through money printing. People began weighing money rather than counting it. While less dramatic, the dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power since abandoning the gold standard. Throughout history, people facing currency debasement have turned to hard assets, things that cannot be created out of thin air. A house bought in 1971 for $25,000 might cost $500,000 today, not because the house improved, but because our money's value crumbled. Real estate and productive businesses offer traditional protection. Properties generate inflation-adjusted rents, while strong businesses can pass rising costs to consumers. Your skills also provide protection. A skilled professional can raise their rates as currency devalues. But today, we have Bitcoin, the first truly scarce digital asset. Unlike dollars, euros, or yen, only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist. No central bank can print more. No government can dilute its value. While gold served this purpose for centuries, Bitcoin offers the same scarcity with instant global transferability. Inflation is more than just rising prices. It's a fundamental change in how money works and how society functions. Understanding it is crucial not just for protecting your wealth, but for understanding the world around you. As we enter an era of unprecedented money creation, this knowledge becomes more important than ever.